大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。 今天我们要聊的故事发生在20世纪初的英国，那是一个传统与革命激烈碰撞的时代。有一群人聚在一起，他们喝茶聊天，他们辩论哲学，他们相爱又争吵，他们改变了英国文化的面貌。这个圈子就叫做布鲁姆斯伯里，而今天的主角是这个圈子里最耀眼的画家之一，他叫做邓肯格兰特。邓肯格兰特在1885年出生于苏格兰高地的因弗内斯郡，他的父亲是一名军官，家族有着深厚的苏格兰传统。小时候的邓肯跟着父亲四处迁居，他在印度待过，在缅甸待过，也在英格兰各地住过。这种漂泊的童年反而培养了他对异国文化的敏锐感受。据说他从很小的时候就爱画画，墙壁是他的画布，任何纸张都逃不过他的铅笔。10几岁的邓肯被送到伦敦接受正规艺术教育，他进入了西敏斯特艺术学校，后来又进入了伦敦的斯莱德美术学院。不过他真正开眼界的机会是在他的舅舅西蒙·李斯特蒙塔古的安排下，前往意大利和巴黎研习艺术。在巴黎的那段日子彻底改变了邓肯对艺术的理解。他看到了马蒂斯的色彩爆炸，他感受到了塞尚对形体的重新思考，他接触到了当时最前卫的后印象派思潮。这些养分日后都成为他艺术风格的根基。回到伦敦之后，邓肯开始进入一个非常特别的社交圈。这个圈子的核心人物包括作家维吉尼亚伍尔夫和他的姐姐画家凡妮莎贝尔，还有传记作家利顿斯特雷奇，经济学家约翰梅纳德凯因斯，艺术评论家克莱夫贝尔，哲学家乔治爱德华摩尔，以及后来加入的许多艺术家和作家。这个群体的聚会地点主要在伦敦布鲁姆斯伯里区的几栋房子里。布鲁姆斯伯里这个地名就成了这个群体的代称。布鲁姆斯伯里圈子是怎么形成的呢？故事要从剑桥大学说起。19世纪末到20世纪初，剑桥有一个秘密学生社团，叫做使徒社。这个社团招募各学科最聪明的年轻人，成员之间进行深刻的哲学辩论。斯特雷奇和凯因斯都是使徒社的成员，他们在那里形成了深厚的友谊。后来这批剑桥毕业生来到伦敦各自发展，并且继续保持着紧密的联系。他们开始在维吉尼亚和他兄弟们的家中定期聚会，最初只是每周4晚上的茶会，渐渐演变成了一个正式的知识分子沙龙。这个沙龙有什么特别之处呢？首先是开放的话题。在维多利亚时代，很多话题是不能公开讨论的，比如性别，比如同性情感，比如宗教怀疑论，比如婚姻制度的问题。但在布鲁姆斯伯里的聚会上，这些话题都可以自由辩论。其次是对艺术的严肃态度。这群人真心相信，艺术和美学体验是人生最重要的事情之一。他们追随摩尔哲学中对美好事物的看重，认为友谊和美的追求是生命的最高价值。在这个圈子里，邓肯格兰特的地位很特殊，他是其中最纯粹的视觉艺术家。在一群以文字见长的人中间，他用色彩和线条说话，而他的个人魅力也让他成为圈子里众多人爱慕的对象。邓肯的感情生活就像他的画作一样，色彩丰富而复杂。在布鲁姆斯伯里的早期，他和利顿斯特雷奇有过一段深刻的情感连结，后来他又和凯因斯相爱。凯因斯是那个时代最伟大的经济学家之一，他后来提出的凯因斯主义改变了全世界的经济政策。但在和邓肯在一起的那段时光，他只是一个深深爱着这位画家的年轻人。然而最重要的感情是邓肯和凡妮莎贝尔之间的关系。凡妮莎是维吉尼亚伍尔夫的姐姐，她自己也是一位非常出色的画家。她和艺术评论家克莱夫贝尔结婚，但婚姻并不能束缚布鲁姆斯伯里圈子对自由的渴望。大约在1914年前后，凡妮莎和邓肯开始了一段深刻的爱情关系。这段关系的特别之处在于，邓肯对男性的吸引力更强， 但他和凡妮莎之间的情感却是真实而持久的。他们不是传统意义上的爱侣，但他们是灵魂伴侣，是艺术伙伴，是彼此生命中最重要的同伴。1916年，邓肯格兰特和凡妮莎贝尔搬到了东萨塞克斯郡的一栋农舍，这栋农舍叫做查尔斯顿农舍。这个地方后来成为了布鲁姆斯伯里精神的具体化身。他们在这里住了几十年，把整栋房子变成了一件巨大的艺术品。墙壁上画满了壁画，家具上有他们亲手绘制的图案，窗帘、床单、陶器，每一样东西都有艺术的痕迹。查尔斯顿农舍至今仍然保存着，是英国最重要的艺术遗址之一，每年吸引大量访客前去朝圣。他们为何在1916年搬去乡下呢？这背后有一段重要的历史背景。第一次世界大战正在进行中，英国政府要求适龄男性服兵役，但邓肯和他的朋友大卫·加内特都是反对战争的和平主义者，他们以农业劳动作为替代役的方式，逃避了上战场的命运。这在当时是需要勇气的选择，因为整个社会都笼罩在民族主义和战争狂热中。布鲁姆斯伯里圈子的很多成员都对这场战争持怀疑态度，这也成为他们被保守派社会批评的原因之一。在查尔斯顿农舍的生活中，邓肯和凡妮莎迎来了一个女儿，她叫做安杰丽卡，出生于1918年。然而有一个秘密被隐瞒了多年，安杰丽卡的父亲并不是凡妮莎的丈夫克莱夫贝尔，而是邓肯格兰特。这个秘密直到安杰丽卡成年后才被揭露。她后来写了一本回忆录，叫做《欺骗中的馈赠》，描述了自己得知真相后的复杂心情，以及在这个非传统家庭中成长的独特经历。让我们回到邓肯格兰特的艺术本身，他的画风有什么特色呢？如果你在美术馆里看到他的作品，很难不被那种明亮而带点神秘感的色彩所吸引。他受到后印象派影响，特别是塞尚和马蒂斯的影响很深，但他并没有完全跟随任何一个流派。他的线条优雅而自由，色彩丰富但不失和谐，画面有一种既现代又古典的气质。他特别擅长人物画和静物画，他画过许多布鲁姆斯伯里朋友们的肖像，那些肖像往往带着一种特别的亲密感，好像你能感受到画家和被画者之间的深厚情谊。他也画了大量的裸体作品，在那个时代，男性画家画男性裸体是相当罕见的，这在某种程度上是邓肯用艺术表达自己内心世界的方式。1910年和1912年，一位非常重要的艺术评论家叫做罗杰·弗莱，在伦敦策划了2场关键的展览，他把这些展览称为后印象派展览。第一次展览展出了塞尚、马奈、高更和梵谷的作品，英国观众看到这些作品时的反应可以说是震惊加愤怒。很多人认为这些作品是垃圾，是对艺术的侮辱，但布鲁姆斯伯里圈子的成员却不这么看，他们热烈地拥抱了后印象派，并且开始在自己的创作中实践这些新的美学理念。邓肯格兰特就是最积极的实践者之一。罗杰·弗莱后来成为布鲁姆斯伯里圈子的重要成员，他和凡妮莎·贝尔也有过一段恋情。更重要的是，他和克莱夫贝尔一起推动了英国对现代艺术的理解和接受。他们提出的形式主义美学理论，强调艺术作品的价值在于其形式和构成，而非其所描绘的内容。这个观点在当时是相当激进的，但后来对西方艺术理论产生了深远影响。1913年，邓肯格兰特参与了一个非常特别的计划，罗杰·弗莱创立了欧米加工作坊，这是一个设计工作坊，目的是把现代艺术的审美带入日常生活。工作坊生产家具、纺织品、陶瓷和各种室内装饰品，全都带有鲜明的后印象派风格，大胆的色彩，抽象的图案，充满活力的线条。邓肯格兰特是工作坊最重要的设计师之一，他在这里设计的纺织品和家具，至今仍然被收藏家们珍视。欧米加工作坊只运作了大约6年， 从1913年到1919年，他的商业成绩并不算成功，但他对英国设计和工艺美术的影响却是非常深远的。他把现代主义的美学精神从画廊带到了日常生活的空间中，这个理念后来影响了英国整整一代的设计师和工艺师。除了绘画和设计，邓肯格兰特还有一个不太为人所知的才能，那就是剧场布景设计。他为多个剧场演出设计过布景和服装。他的剧场设计风格和他的绘画一样，充满了大胆的色彩和现代感。让我们来聊聊布鲁姆斯伯里圈子的哲学核心。这个圈子的精神基础很大程度上来自剑桥哲学家乔治·爱德华·摩尔的著作。摩尔在1903年出版了一本书叫做《伦理学原理》。他在书中提出，人生中最宝贵的事物是友谊和美的欣赏。布鲁姆斯伯里的成员们把这个观点奉为人生指南。他们相信，追求知识和艺术的愉悦是生命中最值得的事情，物质财富和社会地位相对次要。这种哲学观念让布鲁姆斯伯里圈子发展出一种非常特殊的生活方式。他们重视友谊胜过血缘，他们的家庭结构非常多元，各种感情关系交织其中。他们对传统的婚姻制度持怀疑态度，但这并不意味着他们的感情不深刻。恰恰相反，布鲁姆斯伯里的友谊往往极为深厚，很多人维持了几十年的紧密联系。然而，布鲁姆斯伯里圈子也受到了很多批评。批评者说他们是自我放纵的精英，说他们脱离了普通人的生活，说他们的自由主义是有条件的，只限于他们自己这个小圈子。也有人批评他们对殖民主义的态度不够批判。这些批评并非完全没有道理，但我们也要把它们放在时代背景中来理解。在那个维多利亚时代的道德束缚刚刚开始松动的时期，他们的开放态度对许多人来说仍然是一种解放的力量。维吉尼亚·伍尔夫是布鲁姆斯伯里圈子中最广为人知的成员。他的意识流小说改变了20世纪文学的面貌，他的文学评论影响了几代读者。他在1929年出版的文章《自己的房间》成为女性主义思想的重要文献。他一生饱受精神健康问题的困扰，在1941年选择了离开这个世界。维吉尼亚的去世对整个圈子都是沉重的打击，对邓肯格兰特来说尤其如此，因为他认识他几乎是一辈子的事。凡妮莎贝尔在20世纪英国艺术史上常常被她著名的妹妹的光芒所遮蔽，但她本身就是一位非常重要的艺术家。她的绘画风格比邓肯格兰特更为大胆和几何化，有时候甚至接近抽象。在她那个时代，女性艺术家要得到应有的承认非常困难，但凡妮莎以她的才华和意志力，在男性主导的艺术界为自己建立了一席之地。另一位值得特别介绍的成员是利顿斯特雷奇，他是邓肯格兰特的早期爱人，也是一位开创性的传记作家。他在1918年出版的著作《维多利亚名人传》彻底改变了英语世界的传记写作方式。在他之前，传记往往是对伟人的赞美诗，大量引用文件，干燥而无趣。斯特雷奇带来了心理分析的视角，他敢于揭示伟人的弱点和矛盾，用充满机智的文笔把历史人物写得栩栩如生。这种方式在当时是革命性的。约翰·梅纳德·凯因斯在布鲁姆斯伯里圈子中是个特殊的存在，他是少数真正影响了世界历史进程的成员之一。1919年第一次世界大战结束后，他作为英国财政部代表参加了巴黎和会。他对凡尔赛条约的条款深感不安，认为对德国的苛刻惩罚将会埋下未来战争的种子。他辞去了职务，写下了一本名叫《和平的经济后果》的书。他的预言后来被历史所验证。他后来在大萧条时期提出的凯因斯主义，认为政府应该通过积极的财政政策刺激需求以应对经济衰退。这个理论改变了全世界的经济政策。而他年轻时候爱过的那个画家邓肯格兰特是他生命中非常重要的一部分。回到邓肯格兰特的艺术生涯， 他一生的创作量非常庞大，油画、水彩、素描、壁画、纺织品设计、陶瓷设计、舞台设计，他几乎涉足了所有的视觉艺术形式。20世纪230年代，他在英国艺术界的地位相当崇高，他定期在伦敦的画廊举办个展，受到艺评家和收藏家的好评。他也曾入选英国皇家艺术学院的展览。1950年代之后，随着抽象表现主义从美国席卷全球，邓肯格兰特这种具象的后印象派风格开始显得有些过时，他的名声有所下滑，但他从未停止创作。他继续住在查尔斯顿农舍，继续每天画画，以一种从容的姿态面对艺术风潮的变化。凡妮莎贝尔在1961年去世，这对邓肯是巨大的打击。他们共同生活了将近50年，失去他之后的邓肯变得更加沉静，但他仍然继续创作，继续在查尔斯顿农舍生活，偶尔接受访问，偶尔外出参加艺术活动。70年代，布鲁姆斯伯里圈子开始被重新评价，女性主义思想的兴起，让维吉尼亚·伍尔夫和凡妮莎·贝尔的重要性重新得到了应有的认识。对布鲁姆斯伯里整个圈子的学术研究也大量增加。邓肯格兰特这时已经是90多岁的老人，却突然又受到了广泛的关注。他接受了很多访问，回忆那个已经远去的年代，描述那些他曾经深爱过的人们。他的声音成为了那个传奇时代的最后见证。邓肯格兰特在1978年辞世，享年93岁。他是布鲁姆斯伯里圈子中最长寿的成员之一。他亲眼见证了从维多利亚时代到太空时代的整个过程。他看到了2次世界大战，看到了英国帝国的崩解，看到了现代艺术的兴起与演变，却始终保持着一种安静的创作热情。布鲁姆斯伯里圈子留下了什么样的遗产呢？首先是文学方面，维吉尼亚·伍尔夫的作品至今仍然是全球大学英文系的必读书目。他对意识和时间的探索影响了无数后代作家。利顿斯特雷奇的传记写作方式奠定了现代传记的基础。其次是艺术方面，邓肯格兰特和凡妮莎贝尔的作品保存在英国各大美术馆中。查尔斯顿农舍作为一个完整的艺术环境，让后人得以看到布鲁姆斯伯里审美理想的具体实践。第三是思想方面，布鲁姆斯伯里圈子对自由思想和个人自主的强调，对艺术和友谊高于物质和地位的信念，对性别和性向的开放态度，在那个时代都是非常超前的。很多今天我们视为理所当然的价值观，在当时需要很大的勇气才能坚持。第四是对英国文化的具体影响。凯因斯对现代经济政策的贡献自不用说，他还曾担任英国艺术委员会的主席，推动了英国公共艺术教育的发展。克莱夫贝尔和罗杰弗莱的艺术理论帮助英国大众接受了现代艺术。欧米加工作坊的设计精神影响了英国整个20世纪的装饰艺术和设计。有一个细节我觉得特别动人，邓肯格兰特在生命的最后几年仍然每天起床画画。他的手可能不再像年轻时那样稳定，视力也大不如前，但创作的热情从未熄灭。这种对艺术的执着让我想到他的好友维吉尼亚·伍尔夫曾说过的一段话的精神。他说，每一刻都值得被记录，每一个感知都值得被珍惜。邓肯用他的画笔实践了这个信念整整93年。布鲁姆斯伯里圈子的故事告诉我们什么呢？也许最重要的一课是，真正的知识社群有多么珍贵。当一群真诚追求真理和美的人聚在一起，互相激发，互相挑战，互相支持，他们能够创造出超越任何个人的东西。维吉尼亚·伍尔夫没有布鲁姆斯伯里，也许不会有那样的文学成就。邓肯格兰特没有这个充满启发的圈子，也许不会有那样丰盛的创作生涯。真正的友谊和知识的交流是创造力最好的土壤。另一课是关于勇气的。布鲁姆斯伯里的成员们在一个保守的时代选择诚实地面对自己的内心，他们的选择并不总是被社会所接受， 他们受到过嘲笑、批评，甚至谴责，但他们坚持了自己认为正确的生活方式。这种诚实需要很大的勇气，而这种勇气本身，就是对文化的一种贡献。今天我们站在更远的地方，回望那个在伦敦布鲁姆斯伯里区某栋房子里聚会的小圈子，看到那些年轻的脸孔，他们喝着茶，辩论着，笑着，爱着，彼此的生命彼此交织在一起。而邓肯格兰特，那个从苏格兰高地来到伦敦的年轻画家，用他手中的画笔记录下了这一切，留给了我们这些后来者。感谢你今天陪我一起认识邓肯格兰特和布鲁姆斯伯里文人圈。如果你对这个主题有兴趣，可以去看看查尔斯顿农舍的介绍，或者找一找维吉尼亚伍尔夫的作品来读，那是通往那个时代最直接的窗口。我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I'm Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. Today, I want to take you back to the early 20th century in Britain. It was an era when tradition and revolution were crashing against each other with tremendous force. A group of remarkable people began gathering together. They drank tea and talked. They debated philosophy late into the night. They fell in love and fell into arguments. And in doing all of this, they quietly changed the face of British culture. This group became known as the Bloomsbury Group. And our subject today is one of the most dazzling painters that Circle ever produced. His name was Duncan Grant. Duncan Grant was born in 1885 in Inverness-shire, in the Scottish Highlands. His father was a military officer, and the family carried a deep Scottish heritage. As a child, Duncan moved constantly, following his father from posting to posting. He lived in India. He lived in Burma. He moved around various parts of England. This nomadic childhood, rather than unsettling him, gave him a remarkable sensitivity to different cultures and visual worlds. By all accounts, he was drawing from the very earliest age. Walls served as his canvases. Any scrap of paper became the subject of his pencil. In his early teenage years, Duncan was sent to London to receive a formal art education. He attended Westminster School of Art and later the Slade School of Fine Art. But his most transformative experiences came through the arrangement of his uncle, Simon Lister Montague, who enabled him to travel to Italy and Paris to study art. The time he spent in Paris shattered and remade his understanding of what painting could be. He encountered the explosive color of Matisse. He felt the revolutionary rethinking of form in Cézanne. He absorbed the boldest and most forward-looking ideas of the Post-Impressionist movement. These experiences planted seeds that would grow throughout his entire creative life. When Duncan returned to London, he found himself drawn into a very particular social world. At the center of this world were figures including the writer Virginia Woolf and her sister, the painter Vanessa Bell. There was the biographer Lytton Strachey, the economist John Maynard Keynes, the art critic Clive Bell, the philosopher George Edward Moore, and a constantly expanding constellation of artists, writers, and thinkers. The group gathered primarily in the houses located in the Bloomsbury district of London. And so the name stuck. This collection of brilliant, restless, unconventional minds became known as the Bloomsbury Group. How did the Bloomsbury Group come together in the first place? The story begins at Cambridge University. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Cambridge had a secretive student society called the Apostles. This society recruited the most intellectually gifted young people from across disciplines. Its members engaged in deep philosophical debate and formed intense bonds of loyalty. Strachey and Keynes were both apostles. When this generation of Cambridge graduates arrived in London to begin their careers, they maintained their connections. They began gathering regularly at the home of Virginia Woolf and her siblings. What started as Thursday evening tea parties gradually transformed into a genuine intellectual salon. What made this salon so remarkable? First, the openness of its conversations. In the Victorian era, certain subjects simply could not be discussed in polite company. Questions of gender, feelings between people of the same sex, religious doubt, the fundamental problems with the institution of marriage. But in the Bloomsbury gatherings, all of these subjects were fair game for honest debate. Second, there was the group's deeply serious attitude toward art. These people genuinely believed that aesthetic experience and artistic creation were among the most important things a person could pursue. They were influenced by the philosophy of George Edward Moore, who argued that the greatest goods in human life were the pleasures of friendship and the appreciation of beautiful things. The Bloomsbury Group took this idea and made it the animating principle of how they lived. Within this circle, Duncan Grant occupied a very particular position. He was the purest visual artist among a group of people whose primary gift was words. While others expressed themselves through essays and novels and letters, Duncan spoke through color and line. And his personal warmth and beauty made him the object of deep affection from many people in the group. Duncan's emotional life was, like his paintings, rich and layered with complexity. In the early Bloomsbury years, he had a deep and significant connection with Lytton Strachey. Later came his relationship with Keynes. John Maynard Keynes was already on his way to becoming one of the greatest economists in history. The ideas he would later develop about government spending and economic management would reshape the economic policies of nations around the world. But during the time he was with Duncan, he was simply a young man deeply in love with a painter. The most significant relationship in Duncan's life, however, was his bond with Vanessa Bell. Vanessa was Virginia Woolf's older sister. She was also a highly accomplished painter in her own right. She had married the art critic Clive Bell. But the spirit of Bloomsbury resisted all conventional constraints on feeling and connection. Around 1914, Vanessa and Duncan began a relationship of profound depth and intimacy. What made this bond especially remarkable was that Duncan's primary romantic attraction was toward men. And yet what existed between him and Vanessa was entirely real and remarkably enduring. They were not a couple in any conventional sense. But they were spiritual partners. Artistic collaborators. The most constant presences in each other's lives. In 1916, Duncan Grant and Vanessa Bell moved to a farmhouse in East Sussex. The house was called Charleston. This place became the physical embodiment of the Bloomsbury spirit. They lived there for decades. And over those years, they transformed the entire house into a single enormous work of art. The walls were covered in murals. The furniture bore patterns they had painted by hand. Curtains, bed linens, ceramics, every surface, every object, carried some trace of their creative attention. Charleston Farmhouse survives to this day. It is one of the most important artistic heritage sites in Britain. Every year it draws large numbers of visitors who come to experience this unique and extraordinary space. Why did they move to the countryside in 1916? There is an important historical context here. The First World War was underway. The British government was requiring eligible men to serve in the military. But Duncan Grant and his companion David Garnett were committed pacifists, deeply opposed to the war. By working the land as agricultural laborers, they were able to satisfy the requirements of conscientious objection and avoid being sent to the front. This was a choice that required genuine courage. The entire country was saturated with nationalist sentiment and pressure to conform. Many members of the Bloomsbury group shared a skepticism about the war and the jingoism surrounding it. This made them targets of criticism from more conservative quarters of British society. During the years at Charleston, Vanessa and Duncan welcomed a daughter into the world. She was named Angelica, born in 1918. But there was a secret that would remain hidden for many years. Angelica's father was not Vanessa's husband Clive Bell. Her father was Duncan Grant. This truth was only revealed to Angelica when she was already an adult. She later wrote a memoir exploring her experience of growing up in this unconventional household and her complex feelings upon learning the truth of her origins. Let us turn to Duncan Grant's art itself. What made his work distinctive? If you encountered his paintings in a museum, it would be difficult not to be drawn in by the light that seems to emanate from his canvases, that sense of luminous warmth combined with a subtle undercurrent of mystery. His influences included the Post-Impressionists, especially Cézanne and Matisse. But he never simply replicated any single influence. His line work was elegant and free. His use of color was rich but never discordant. His paintings possessed a quality that felt simultaneously modern and timeless. He was especially gifted in portraiture and still life. Many of his portraits depicted fellow members of the Bloomsbury group. These paintings carry an unusual quality of intimacy, as though the viewer can sense the genuine affection between the painter and his subject. He also produced a large body of work depicting the nude figure. For a male painter to paint male nude subjects with this kind of tenderness and directness was genuinely rare in that era. In some sense, these works represented Duncan's way of expressing through paint what language could not quite hold. In 1910 and 1912, a crucial figure entered the picture. The art critic Roger Fry organized two landmark exhibitions in London. He called them the Post-Impressionist exhibitions. The first brought before the British public the work of Cézanne, Manet, Gauguin, and Van Gogh. The reaction from audiences ranged from shock to outrage. Many viewers considered these works offensive, even insulting to the very idea of art. But the Bloomsbury Group embraced Post-Impressionism with great enthusiasm. They saw in these new approaches the future of painting, and they began incorporating these ideas into their own creative practice. Duncan Grant was among the most committed practitioners of this new aesthetic sensibility. Roger Fry himself eventually became an integral part of the Bloomsbury Circle. He also had a significant relationship with Vanessa Bell. Together with Clive Bell, Fry developed what became known as formalist art theory. This theory argued that the value of a work of art lies not in what it depicts, but in its formal qualities, its composition, its color relationships, its structure. This was a genuinely radical position at the time, but it went on to have a lasting influence on how Western art criticism understood and evaluated visual art. In 1913, Duncan Grant became part of a very special venture. Roger Fry established the Omega Workshops. This was a design studio with an ambitious mission, to bring the aesthetic vision of modern art into the realm of everyday life. The workshop produced furniture, textiles, ceramics, and all manner of interior objects. All of them bore the unmistakable mark of post-impressionist influence. Bold color choices, abstract patterning, dynamic lines that seemed to pulse with energy. Duncan Grant was one of the Omega Workshop's most important designers. The textiles and furniture he created for the workshop are still sought by collectors today. The Omega Workshops operated for about 6 years, from 1913 to 1919. Its commercial success was limited, but its influence on British design and the decorative arts was substantial and lasting. It demonstrated that the visual language of modernism did not belong only to galleries and museums. It could inhabit the spaces of ordinary life. This idea rippled outward and influenced generations of British designers and craftspeople. In addition to painting and design, Duncan Grant possessed another talent that is less widely recognized. He was an accomplished designer of theatrical sets and costumes. He created designs for several theatrical productions. His stage work shared the same qualities as his paintings: bold color, a confident modern sensibility, a willingness to transform visual space. Let us spend a moment with the philosophical foundations that held the Bloomsbury Group together. The intellectual bedrock of this circle was largely provided by the Cambridge philosopher George Edward Moore. In 1903, Moore published his major work, a book called Principia Ethica. In it, he argued that the greatest goods available to human beings were the pleasures of personal affection and the appreciation of beautiful objects. The Bloomsbury Group took this as something close to a personal manifesto. They believed that the pursuit of art and the cultivation of friendship were among the highest purposes of human existence. Material success and social status were, by comparison, far less important. This philosophical grounding gave the Bloomsbury Group a very unusual way of life. They valued chosen friendship above the bonds of family or obligation. Their domestic arrangements were various and unconventional. Their attitudes toward marriage and romantic commitment were flexible and exploratory. Critics often describe them as morally irresponsible or indulgent. But within their own circle, the bonds of genuine care and loyalty were often remarkably deep and enduring. The Bloomsbury Group was not without its critics, and the criticisms were not always unfair. Detractors argued that they were self-indulgent elitists, that their liberalism existed only within the comfortable walls of their own privileged circle, that their attitude toward colonialism was insufficiently critical. There is truth in some of these charges. But it is also worth placing these individuals in their historical moment. In the decade before the First World War, when Victorian moral codes still exerted enormous pressure on individual lives, their willingness to live openly according to their own values represented something genuinely courageous. Virginia Woolf is the most universally recognized member of the Bloomsbury Group. Her stream of consciousness novels transformed the possibilities of literary fiction in the 20th century. Her literary criticism shaped generations of readers. Her essay, published in 1929, arguing for the conditions women need in order to write and create, became a foundational document of feminist thought. She struggled throughout her life with severe mental illness. In 1941, she chose to end her life. Her death was a profound blow to everyone who loved her, and Duncan Grant, who had known her almost his entire adult life, felt her loss deeply. Vanessa Bell is a figure whose reputation has often been overshadowed by her famous sister. But she was a genuinely important artist in her own right. Her painting style was in some ways more radically experimental than Duncan's, moving toward bold geometry and near abstraction. In her era, for a woman artist to achieve serious recognition required exceptional determination and talent. Vanessa possessed both, and she carved out a significant place for herself in a world that was far from welcoming to women artists. Lytton Strachey also deserves special mention. He was Duncan Grant's early intimate companion, and he was also a writer who fundamentally changed the genre of biography in the English language. His 1918 book about eminent Victorians transformed the way life stories were written. Before Strachey, biography tended toward reverent, heavily documented accounts of great figures. Strachey introduced psychological insight and genuine wit. He was willing to illuminate contradictions and human weaknesses in his subjects. He made historical figures live and breathe on the page in a way that had never been done before. This approach was revolutionary, and it shaped the entire tradition of modern biography. John Maynard Keynes occupies a unique position in the Bloomsbury story. He is one of the few members who genuinely altered the course of world history through his professional work. After the First World War ended in 1918, Keynes served as a representative of the British Treasury at the Paris Peace Conference. He was deeply troubled by the punitive terms being imposed on Germany through the Treaty of Versailles. He believed these terms would plant the seeds of future catastrophe. He resigned his position and published a book arguing against the peace settlement. History vindicated his warnings. When the Great Depression struck in the late 1920s and early 1930s, Keynes developed his transformative economic theory arguing that governments could and should use active fiscal policy to stabilize economies during downturns. This thinking reshaped economic policy across the world. And the young painter who had been so central to his heart was part of the foundation on which that remarkable life was built. Returning to Duncan Grant's art, the scope of his lifetime output was extraordinary. Oil paintings, watercolors, drawings, murals, textile designs, ceramic designs, stage designs. He worked across virtually every form of visual art. Through the 1920s and 1930s, he occupied an honored position in the British art world. He exhibited regularly in London galleries to favorable reception from critics and collectors. After the 1950s, as abstract expressionism swept westward from America and transformed the international art world, Duncan Grant's figurative post-impressionist style began to seem, to some observers, like a voice from another era. His prominence faded somewhat in critical circles. But he never stopped working. He continued to live at Charleston. He continued to paint every day. He met the changing tides of artistic fashion with a quiet equanimity. When Vanessa Bell died in 1961, the loss was devastating for Duncan. They had shared their lives for nearly half a century. In the years after her death, he became quieter. But he continued to create. He continued to inhabit Charleston. He received occasional visitors, gave occasional interviews, and remained a gentle, unhurried presence in the world. In the 1970s, the Bloomsbury Group underwent a significant reassessment. The rise of feminist scholarship brought renewed attention to Virginia Woolf and Vanessa Bell. Academic study of the entire Bloomsbury circle expanded dramatically. Duncan Grant, by this time well into his 90s, found himself the subject of widespread renewed interest. He gave interviews. He recalled the vanished world of the early 20th century. He described the people he had known and loved. His voice became one of the last living connections to that legendary era. Duncan Grant died in 1978 at the age of 93. He was among the longest-lived members of the Bloomsbury Group. He had witnessed the span of history from the Victorian era to the space age. He had lived through 2 world wars, the collapse of the British Empire, the rise and transformation of modern art. Through all of it, he had never stopped painting. What is the lasting legacy of the Bloomsbury Group? In literature, Virginia Woolf's novels and essays remain essential texts in universities around the world. Her explorations of consciousness, time, and the inner life of women continue to speak to readers everywhere. Lytton Strachey's approach to biography transformed a genre, and its influence has never entirely faded. In the visual arts, the work of Duncan Grant and Vanessa Bell is held in major British collections. Charleston Farmhouse stands as a unique and irreplaceable testimony to what happens when artists commit to living inside their own aesthetic vision. In the realm of ideas, Keynes shaped the economic frameworks that governments still argue over today. Clive Bell and Roger Fry helped an entire nation begin to see and understand modern art. The Omega workshops demonstrated that modernist aesthetics could be part of everyday life, not just gallery culture. Perhaps most profoundly, the Bloomsbury Group left behind an example of what a genuine intellectual community can achieve. When people who are truly committed to ideas and art come together, challenge each other, and sustain each other across decades, something is created that none of them could have produced alone. Virginia Woolf without Bloomsbury might not have found the courage and the creative conditions that made her masterpieces possible. Duncan Grant without this extraordinary circle might have been a fine painter with a smaller life. The community itself was part of the creation. There is also the example of courage. The members of the Bloomsbury Group, in a deeply conservative era, chose to live honestly according to their own values and their own sense of themselves. They were criticized, mocked, and condemned. But they held to their principles. And in doing so, they helped expand the space available to everyone who came after. I find something particularly moving in the image of Duncan Grant in his final years. Getting up each morning, picking up his brushes, working in the light of Charleston. His hands perhaps less steady than they once were. His eyes no longer as sharp. But the impulse to make something beautiful, undiminished. Virginia Woolf once wrote about the importance of attending to every moment, of honoring each perception and experience. Duncan Grant, with his brushes and his colors, practiced that attention for 93 years. Thank you for spending this time with me exploring the world of Duncan Grant and the Bloomsbury Group. If this story has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to seek out Virginia Woolf's writing, to look at photographs of Charleston Farmhouse, or to find reproductions of Duncan Grant's paintings. Each of these is a doorway into a world that was strange and brilliant and genuinely alive. See you next time.